Hey everyone, I'm here with my Quinlan Vos deck tech for the Richmond sectors. Today I'm kind of going to be focusing on really getting into the granular card choices and why we choose cards at each slot on the cost curve. Quinlan's kind of an older deck at this point, so it's been out about 5 months or so. If you're looking for general strategy or kind of how to play Quinlan, I think there's already a lot of content out there. So I'm just going to walk you through some of the choices on how did I make my deck for this specific event. So the first one was why play Quinlan at all. I think Quinlan is the best fair deck left in the format at this point. Um, I don't think it is necessarily the strongest deck. I think that's probably Han 1 green, but Quinlan's a really good deck if you want to play, interactive Star Wars. You still want to be on the more aggressive side, and there's no matchups where you sit down and it's like, this is absolutely an auto loss. Like, you should have game into everyone. You're going to have to play well, but that's a good place to be, I think, for a big event like this. I'm going to go through my current list for Richmond, and then right after that, I'm going to go through all the cards that I considered and maybe give some suggestions on if you don't like the cards I'm playing, what drops would I play instead in those spots. And then at the very end, I'm going to go through what I consider to be two of the most important game sequences, which is turn one and win to Tarkin Town versus win to pass, and then the 5 resource flip turn and how both yourself and your opponent have to navigate the threat of Plo Koon. Um, so this is my current list for Richmond right here. Not going to get super into the specifics yet, but just know that if anything looks odd to you, I think I've kind of come to the conclusion that Han 1 green is the best deck in the format, and so some of the card choices here are definitely informed by that. Um, but let's just dive right into the card choices at each slot on the curve. So starting with the 2 cost units, I tried to break all these slides up into cards that, in my opinion, I would never cut, at least in this meta, versus all the other options that I considered. Um, so the 2 must-includes for me are Sabine Wren and L3. Sabine, I found, is the card I'm looking for in the most matchups. And L3 is, everyone knows the 2-2 for 2 shielded units are good. And L3 is the best of those. It has Smuggle. It has another ability. It's just a really strong card. The other options, and this is kind of in the order that I considered them actually, I'm playing A-Wing. I think A-Wing is really important to beat some of your bad matchups because against Han 1 Green, it successfully challenges their early space units by letting you attack into them and then ping when you play your 3-drop. But probably even more importantly than that, one of your worst matchup archetypes for Quinlan is early space aggressive decks. So this is like Sabine Yellow or Kaz Red or even Kaz Yellow. Like any deck that wants to play Cartel Turncoat or is an early deploy pilot leader, you kind of need as many space options as possible to contest those starts. So that's why I ended up here. And then Crafty Smuggler is the last 2-drop I played. I will say I would not recommend going below 12 2-drops. I've tested some versions at 11 or 10, but the reality is in this deck, I mulligan a lot looking for specific 2-drops. I'm very willing to mulligan aggressively. And with that being the case, you never want to miss on your 2-drop play after mulliganing. Um, so I would play 4. I chose Smuggler because, again, it's just a 2-2 shielded unit. In the matchups where you're the aggressor, I think this is the best option because it protects itself and it will push damage, and it will push damage later in the game more so than the beginning, which is always nice. But going into some of the ones that didn't make my list, X34 Landspeeder is kind of a fan favorite right now. And I see the appeal. Like it trades with a lot of two-cost units, and it even trades with all all the units that I'm playing except A-Wing favorably with Quinlan because you can ping off the shields and ambush, or you can just straight up kill Sabine after the ping. My issue with L3, or sorry, X34 Landspeeder is, in the Quinlan mirror, no one is ever going to play a 2-drop on turn 1. Like, even if they don't have Landspeeder, you're always going to be behind in that exchange. So there's no incentive to play it there. Um, I think the incentives for the Landspeeder are later in the game when they try to push damage with shielded units. It is good to one action, one unit, clean that up. And there's matchups that are not Quinlan where the card is good. So Sabine yellow, where you can just get value out of the ambush, or it's like insane against Gar Saxon, who also wants to lead on shielded units, and they probably will play turn 1 into you. So I think it's a reasonable option. I just didn't go with it because I feel like Tarkin Town covers a lot of the aggressive matchup openings, and so I'd rather have a more proactive threat with Crafty Smuggler. Um, the card that was a lot closer to making the cut for me was Grogu. Grogu's a little weird because Quinlan is an aggressive deck, but this is like the absolute best card you can have against decks that are more aggressive than you. Not only does it threaten an early force throw, which can be nice, it stops all the piloting decks, and the piloting decks are a really problem matchup for you. Um, but once we get into the 3-drops, I'm going to talk about one that I'm playing that I think clashes with Grogu, and I'll get into that a little bit. The other option you can play is Anakin if you still want a force unit early to enable those, force throw, kind of high roll plays, but still want some aggressive stats. I can't get behind this card. It's a 2/3 functionally with no text because you don't play a lot of vehicles and you're really just playing it for the force trait, and that's not enough for me. But getting into the 3-cost units, the 2 must includes. I have Cassian and Millennium Falcon, the piece of junk. Uh, I mean, these cards are insane. Like they've been around since set 1 and set 2 respectively. Cassian is a 3-cost 3/5, so it's the best stats in the game, and then it's arguably the best smuggle card in the game also. So it's all upside. I would not cut that card. Falcon is okay in this deck. You can't really cut it because you're so weak in space, and this is one of the better space removal spells that you have access to, but it doubles as an early space removal spell and then a late game damage push. So like, I don't know. You've played with Falcon, it's great. Um, Probably the most surprising inclusion that you saw on the list is Gorilla Soldier, and this is the card that, in my opinion, clashes with Grogu the most. Um, I think Gorilla Soldiers is pretty insane right now. It helps a lot of your bad matchups, which are, in my opinion, the blue-green villain decks or the decks that are a little more aggressive than you. And Gorilla Soldiers is such an aggressive card, especially when people are threatened by your early Tarkin Town, where they might just pass through turn 1. If you play this card on an empty board, it represents 5 damage out of hand, and that can swing a race really quickly. Um, my issue is with Grogu specifically and Gorilla Soldiers is you can't, turn 1 want to play a really interactive slow card, and then turn 2 try to play a really poorly statted, very aggressive card because that draw just doesn't make sense. So I decided to commit to the progressive threats and go with the Gorilla Soldier. But if that's not the style you want to pursue, then I would recommend one of these bottom row cards in the 3-drop spot and then play the Grogu if you kind of want to be more reactive. Um, Disabling Fangfighter recently made my main deck, and that is directly a reaction to Han Green being so good. If you haven't played against this deck, it is a very challenging matchup for Quinlan sometimes. They're very aggressive very early in space, and they do it off of the back of some really strong pilots. Fang Fighter does a lot to turn that matchup around because it can kill a pilot, ping their Millennium Falcon with the Quinlan ability, and then you can use Tarkin Town to kill it pretty cleanly. Um, and that swings the tempo back a little bit for you. Uh, the upside is also that Fangfighter helps against the Darksaber draws out of Sabine, which is kind of the easiest way that they can punk you out of the game. So I consider this, I mean, it's clearly not well statted, and it is a very reactive card, but I kind of consider it a necessity to beat the best draws against you right now. And then right now, I have one tech in the sideboard. This is a little up in the air. I'm not sure exactly how grindy this format's going to be, but tech is obviously one of the best grind cards in the game. I think this could very easily be cut for basically any card that you want to play. And then these bottom row are all cards that I have played this format. Liberated Slaves is probably my go-to if you want to prep for the mirror better, because 3 cost 3/5 is the easiest way to play around Tarkin Town and kind of lets you proactively play into it when you have the initiative. Red 5, on the other hand, is not great into Tarkin Town, but I used to consider it very good into Han decks because those felt like they would get grindy, and it felt like you had time to deal damage to units and kind of grind out small advantages. I don't feel like that's necessarily the case as much anymore with Han Yellow going down in popularity. So this has fallen out of favor for me. And then Ezra is probably a good card, and it is an early Force user. I don't know why I'm like the biggest Ezra hater that I know in this game. So I hate how bad it is into Tarkin Town. I hate how it gets killed by like Forlom or Bosk or Han Pilot on the ground. It's just the 3/4 stat line really frustrates me, and I feel like it's too common where I play this and get no value, where Guerrilla Soldiers has worse stats, but at least it's doing something immediately every game. So I've been off Ezra for a little while. That's probably not going to make it back into my list unless there's some really busted Force synergies. Moving on to the 4 drops here, this is where it starts to get pretty easy for Quinlan. The 2 4 drops that we are playing are Ahsoka and Kira, and these are clearly the 2 best, I guess, for a couple of reasons. Like one, they're both an additional discard effect of some sort. Kira doesn't actually take a card out of your opponent's hand, but it's still disruptive. And with this deck, once you commit to the discard package, you kind of need enough effects to really, you know, make it as effective as possible. It's just like the discard effects kind of compound on each other. And in addition, Ahsoka is potentially disruptive if you can force them to discard a unit card, and it also has the Force trait, so it's kind of really the slam dunk include from the new set. Some of the other options that would mostly appear in the sideboard. K2, I think, used to be very good. It saw some play during set 3, although probably not as much as it should have because Cunning matched up so well against it from the Han Yellow deck. But at this point, all the matchups that K2 is really good into are now playing no glory only results. So, this card that you would theoretically be either playing or sideboarding for a matchup is not very good in that matchup anymore. Like, they do have to have no glory, but instead of you 2 for wanting them, they're now 2 for wanting you, which kind of sucks. On the other hand, Shadowed Hover Tank, in the list that I showed at the beginning, is currently a 2 of. I actually think it should be a 3 of, probably. It's one of the better cards into Sabine, and Sabine can be a tricky matchup, especially the yellow version. The 5/3 Sentinel stat line, although their units earlier on the curve will trade with it, you can normally sequence it in the turn where they want to attack with Sabine last, and they just can't because the tank kills it cleanly. So they kind of miss at least 3 damage and their first action next turn. Cham Syndulla is a card that I was playing earlier in the format, but I actually don't love anymore. I think the optimal case for Cham is to have a 6 cost leader because that's when Han like will guarantee to use his ability is him going 5 to 6, and if you can also play Cham to go 5 to 6 and immediately deploy, that's pretty good. But with this deck, you have a 5 cost leader, so that doesn't happen as much, and you don't have a ton of top end, so it's not like the ramp is just getting you into more powerful cards. Like you, for the most part, cap out at 5, and then a couple of 7s with the Han Solo unit. And then going into the 5 cost units, Plo Koon and Han Solo are the two that I consider must includes. Plo Koon is by far the better of the two, and he's kind of one of the busted cards in this deck, and basically the reason to play the deck, in my opinion, outside of Force Throw. Uh, Essentially, in this deck, he can one-shot, I believe, any 5 cost leader that's not a pilot, either with the combination of the Quinlan ping or just ambushing for 6. And it's so powerful that that turn, I think, has its own section in this video where people are going to try to play around this, and you kind of need to know how to navigate that turn on the other side to make sure you don't waste a bunch of resources. Han Solo is pretty good in this deck, actually arguably better than he is in a lot of the other Han Solo decks because with Quinlan Ping, you can kill either Luke Skywalkers pretty cleanly or Darth Vader units if they don't ambush into you. The reason I think he's a must include though is because I think Quinlan's going to be one of the two most popular decks, and in the yellow heroism mirrors, it's normally whoever plays the last Han Solo unit wins the game. So I'm maxing out at 3. That's definitely a card that you could go down to 2 if you don't want to respect the mirror as much or just have other cards you'd rather play. But some of the other options that I am playing, I'm now playing Big Millennium Falcon. This was pretty popular in set 3, at least as a 1 or a 2 of. It fell out of popularity during the Django meta because it didn't match up super well into Ruthless Raider, and everyone was playing Commandeer, so at least at the beginning of the format, so you would play this card, they would take it, hit you for 5, and then you'd never get a chance to replay it most of the time. But now I think it's pretty important to be able to kind of slam the door on the Han Green space unit side, or even to just be able to kill their own Millennium Falcon that they play. So I think it's good right now. I'm playing 2, and I have 1 Mace Windu in the sideboard. This card is okay. I've been struggling to find any cards that I want to sideboard for the mirror, or for the most part, some of those blue heroism decks that go, like, they get a little bit grindy. So Mace Windu's fine. Like, he's a one of, and I think there will be games that he wins you, but really you just want an additional 7 drop, and he's kind of the best option that you have. Poe and Wrecker are two that I considered, but am currently not playing either. I think Poe is by far like the better option of the two. I put Wrecker on here just because it's a powerful red card and people might ask about him, but this deck actually uses their resources pretty well past 6 with all the smuggle, and you just don't really want to play Wrecker for that reason. He's kind of anti-synergistic when you're playing a Han Solo unit as well. Poe, on the other hand, got really popular in the Django meta. I think kind of popularized by the Bothan network for the most part. And the reason was everything that makes Plo Koon so powerful kind of enabled Poe in this deck, where they would spend all of the 5 resource turn trying to play around Plo Koon, and then your last action you would just play a Poe instead. Normally right before the leader flipped, and it'd just be like, okay, either you can claim and exhaust my Poe or deal with it in some way, and then we're going to do the Plo Koon dance all over again, or if not, I get to claim and attack with Poe for 8 or maybe 10 if you have a blaster. So I think this card's really good. It's a nice additional bit of upgrade hate as well, and discard, so it kind of does everything you want to. It just does it really slowly. So I stopped playing it. I think it's definitely legitimate though. I would not play more than two, I don't think, at this point. Um, but yeah, Poe is really good. I'm just he doesn't fit the style that I want to play at this point. And then getting into non-units, the only two must-include cards that I put on here, one is Force Throw. Force Throw is the best card in the deck. This is your equivalent to Overwhelming Barrage or Cunning or whatever most broken card led you to play a deck before, Triple Dark Raid. Force Throw is for this deck. It's often a 2-for-1, and what's crazy about Force Throw is, unlike some of those other cards, like maybe OB specifically, if you draw a couple of Force Throws together at the same time, it feels almost impossible to lose the game because people, when they're making their resourcing decisions, especially if you've been pressuring their hand, they can normally play around one Force Throw where they kept a low cost card, and then you play the second Force Throw, and all of a sudden you're getting, like a 5+ cost card, and you're just killing a unit outright on board. Like it gets pretty nutty. My build, notably, is probably the worst version for Force Throw because there's no Ezra, there's no Grogu, there's no Anakin. So the earliest you can ever Force Throw is on 5 resources, but it just doesn't really matter. Like, it's still good enough that, I don't know, it kind of defines the deck. And then Surprise Strike and Hotshot Blaster I grouped together. I would play at least 5 pump effects. I think the correct number is 6, realistically, but I'm only playing 5 right now. Um, I think you should probably play 2 Spark of Rebellions in the main deck and switch Surprise Strike to a 3 of. I really enjoy the discard aspect of this deck, and I kind of think it enables the way that I want to play. So I keep playing 3 Sparks, but at its core, this is still a very aggressive deck, and Surprise Strike is one of the best aggressive yellow cards in the game. Um, but going into the other options, Spark is one that I am playing as a 3 of. I think this is kind of another card that, on that crucial Plo Koon turn, they're so busy playing around Plo Koon that sometimes you can disrupt their turn with a late Spark of Rebellion or a Spark of Rebellion, so that way you know how your Force Throw is set up. Um, this isn't often a card I play on turn 1, even though it does cost 2. I think you want to develop to the board for the most part. So I would prioritize units over Spark, but in the mid game, Spark is really good. Bamboozle, I'm currently playing 2 of in the main deck. Similar logic to disabling Fangfighter, a lot of the cards that kind of blow you out of the game are upgrades. So whether it's Darksaber, whether it's Chewbacca, or just pilot leaders, Bamboozle just kind of deals with all of them pretty cleanly, often for 0 resources. Um, the next two, I put Waylay here, but really this could be a Spare the Target, which I am playing Spare the Target. I think it's slightly better, although you could play it in either direction. Um, this is kind of my catch-all sideboard card for when I play against random hero blue decks that are playing Obi-Wan, or maybe random Piet decks that I don't think are going to be a huge percentage of the meta, but you still want to have outs to these annoying cards. And then Jam Communications is probably the card I'm most likely to cut by the time Richmond comes up. I'm just not sure for what. This card was a lot better during the Django meta, and right now it's kind of only good into Bosk, I think, and maybe the blue-green decks, but even there, I think it's only okay. And the next two didn't make the cut for me, but I think are both very good cards as well. Daring Raid is the one I would most like to find room for. It's just like a really good all-purpose card. Once your Tarkin Town is gone, people kind of play the game differently in how they're willing to trade units with you and just what they're playing around. And that additional 2 damage from Daring Raid that's not coming from a unit is pretty useful. In addition, this is one of the cleanest answers to Stolen AT Hauler on turn 1 from the Han deck, where you can kind of just pass until they play it, and then you daring raid, you Tarkin Town, and you take their 4/5 on turn one. It's just uh, like you can only fit in so many tech cards, and this is the one that got cut for me, but I think it's pretty legitimate still. And Pillage was my last one here. Pillage is probably the most likely card for me to replace Jam Communications. I think against the blue-green decks, you kind of want that um, extra discard instead of the targeted discard from Jam. This card's just really medium is the issue. You're paying 4 resources and you're not developing the board at all, so it does help you, but it doesn't directly progress how you're winning the game because you still are a unit aggro deck. And then I just want to go through some of the important turn sequences, the way I see it in Quinlan. So the first thing I think a lot of people consider is when should I pass on turn one? And I think the answer is a lot less than you think. So, like I've said a couple times, you are an aggressive unit deck, and so a lot of matchups you want to develop to the board because you'll be able to get Tarkin Town value later. Either they will trade with your units, or you'll force throw them to chip some damage off a unit, or any number of things could happen. You could even run your 2-drop into their 3-drop and then Tarkin Town to kind of get ahead in the stats race. So the only decks that I definitively recommend passing against are the mirror, where there's no good play that you can play in turn one of the mirror that's not going to put you behind on value. Like even if you play a crafty smuggler or an L3 and then they play one and ping your shield off, like you're just at a huge disadvantage. So I would always pass in the mirror, and I think it's correct for both players to pass. And the other time I would pass is what I would call all of the buff-based aggro decks. So this is mostly Sabine, but it could apply to something like a Kazuda or maybe another pilot-based deck that's not Han Solo, who's going to put his pilots on higher cost units. Um, so if any deck that might be playing something like a Fleet Lieutenant or Wing Leader, so it's really mostly Sabine. I think those are decks you can pass into because I think they should play into your Tarkin Town and just make you use it, so that way they can catch up with ECL later. But it's a hard call. Sometimes they will play into it, and it is what it is. And then how should I use Tarkin Town? This kind of goes along with when you pass on turn one. I think the important thing to note here is you don't always have to Tarkin Town their 1-drop, even in matchups where they played into it. So using Sabine again as an example, if they play a Battlefield Marine on turn one and my turn one was L3, there's a chance that I might not Tarkin Town their Battlefield Marine. And the reason being is if in that matchup you can save Tarkin Town for their ECL turn, that's actually a lot better for you. But there are some important things to think about. It's namely what happens if they wing leader me is kind of the big one. So if my turn one is L3 and I have a hotshot blaster smuggled, then I probably won't Tarkin Town. Worst case is they fleet lieutenant me, I kill their battlefield marine, play my own 3-drop, and then I Tarkin Town the fleet lieutenant. So I took some unnecessary damage, admittedly, but I'm going into their flip turn with a completely open board, so I feel okay about that game state. But if you don't have that hotshot blaster and you're just going to lose the game to a wing leader, then you do need to use Tarkin Town. Or in the same example, if they play A-wing first, you need to use Tarkin Town because if they chewy you, then you're going to lose the game. So just be smart about it. Like if your ping helps set up a favorable trade in the same arena, because kind of think about with the context of your hand if you need to use Tarkin Town. But if it's a deck that's just as aggressive as you and they're lane dodging you, then I probably would use it. So should I play 1-cost units? So in my list, I currently have 2 Greedos in the sideboard. I think most of the one cost units are not very good in Quinlan, but yeah, as you know, with Quinlan being so popular, people are looking at one drops in order to dodge the turn one Tarkin towns. Like Sabine Yellow is a big offender of this, where they would love to play double one drops, and that's kind of why I'm testing Greedo in that spot. Again, Kaz or like these hero pilot decks also like to do that. It's it's kind of up to you. I think Sabine Yellow is a pretty niche deck. And if Sabine Green is playing one drops, those are normally a lot worse than their two drops, so it doesn't feel that bad for them to dodge Tarkin Town. But I don't know. You can kind of cater your sideboard to the matchups you want to beat, and if you're worried about those hyper aggressive decks, then I would recommend playing a couple. And the nice part about Greedo is Greedo's actually really good against Sabine Green as well. In this deck, you hit about a third of the time on his ability, which is not terrible. I mean, I've definitely played worse Greedo decks than that. And I don't know. Sabine is honestly kind of a dicey matchup, like either version, although yellow's a lot worse. So I don't hate having a card that overlaps into both of them. And then, how do I optimize the 5 resource turn if the opponent is playing around Plo Koon? Sorry, that got cut off here. Um, this is a really important turn of the game. So, the two examples here are really just the one example that's relevant at this point is Han. Like, if you're playing against a Han player who did not resupply, then he's going to flip on the same turn as you. So, on the 5 resource turn, he's going to be able to flip. And normally what happens is you're both trying to delay as many actions as possible to play around Plo Koon. Because if you get to Plo Koon as Han cleanly, it's really bad for him. So you'll often attack with all the units on the board. You know, he's going to activate Han to put a resource down. You're going to deploy Quinlan. You're going to attack with Quinlan potentially. Um, and then at this point, what's most likely to happen is he's going to play something for 6. So worst case scenario is normally Smuggle Falcon. And what's going to happen is you're going to have 5 resources open. He has spent all of his at this point, and you both have no actions left to do. So you know you kind of have to go into that turn knowing that that's going to be the play pattern because it almost always is the play pattern. Unless they're really desperate, they will never flip into Plo Koon. So kind of as you're getting, as you're resourcing up to the 5 resource turn, you want to have a backup plan built in. Whether that is, you kept Kira and Ahsoka, so that way you could play Kira on 4, then you could play Ahsoka on 5 and maybe force throw them. Or, maybe you have a force throw plus you're going to smuggle a blaster on 5 resources. And often what happens at that point is, you do your play at that point. So, he spent all his resources. You play Akira and name, one of the cards left in his hand, and he's going to flip and hit you for 4, but you claim in the meantime, and then your first action is going to be to Plo Koon on turn 6. And that's kind of what we talked about during the Poe segment as well. It's why Poe is so good in this deck sometimes is you both spend all your actions and then you play a Poe and the Han player has a choice. Like he can flip and hit you with for 4 with Han and then you just immediately kill his Han next turn with the Poe. Um, but again, I think that's still a little bit too narrow for me, and I think it's really only great in that matchup. But just kind of keep in mind, and this is where cards like Daring Raid and Jam Communications come into play as well. If you're not going to play a 5 resource card on your 5 resource turn, then the next best thing is normally a 4 plus a 1. So kind of keep that in mind, either hold a force throw or I actually play the blaster not smuggled a lot in this deck because it's pretty good. Like obviously a 1 cost plus 2 isn't actually a card you would include in your deck, but the games are so fast in this format, it's just a good use of your resources. But yeah, so that's all I had on Quinlan today. Yeah, I appreciate you sticking through. If you have, the socials for Team Secret will be down below, including our Discord. Like, if I end up playing Quinlan and Richmond, which is a very high opportunity, I will post the list that I'm playing in the deck channel for Quinlan. But let me know what you think. Let me know if there's any cards that you love in Quinlan that I missed. And until next time, thank you guys.